William Neal Moore pled guilty to murder in the commission of an armed robbery in 1974 and was sentenced to death in Georgia. He spent 16 and a half years on death row. 8 times execution dates were set to carry out his execution. He once came within 7 hours of being executed by the state of Georgia. I want to welcome him, and why don't you start, Mr. Moore, by just telling us how it was that you were sentenced to death?
I committed a murder and armed robbery, and I pled guilty. My family hired a lawyer that they paid $9,000 to. And after he had came to the county jail to talk to me, he said, well, I seen the confession and basically nothing I can do about it. But my brother's a judge, and we'll talk to this other guy, and you plead guilty, and we get you a life sentence. So on July 17, 1974, when I went in the courtroom to plead guilty, when the judge came in the courtroom, he actually already had my death sentence typed up before we even went to trial. Wasn't much of a trial. It was a prosecutor actually basically rehearsing my confession, everything that I said. And after that, the judge asked my attorney, what is your defense? And he said, Your Honor, we plead guilty, talk to Billy. And I got on the stand, explaining to the judge how wrong I was, how sorry I was. I gave the money back, and the reason why I pled guilty because I was in fact guilty, but that I did not mean to commit the murder, but I'm totally responsible. And he said that I did a good and honorable thing by giving him the money back by pleading guilty, but on Friday the 13th of 1974, I'll be taken to the state prison and executed.
All right, let me back you up just a little. Tell us just a little about the crime and about how you felt after you had committed it.
Well, committing the crime was, first of all, I was in some financial need, and which is not an excuse. There's never an excuse for murder. But the background information is I was trying to get some money to be able to take care of my son. And I met this guy, and he said he knew a man that kept $30,000 in his house, and we could take it. So the plan with nobody was to get hurt, was just to take the money. But in the course of trying to get the money, Mr. Stapleton came out of his bedroom with a shotgun, and the shotgun barrel hit me in the leg, and it scared him, and he fired the shotgun, and it scared me, and I fired the pistol, and I shot him and killed him. And after that, it was like 30, 40 minutes, I'm back at my trailer, I'm sitting at...
Let me ask you, had you been under the influence of any alcohol or drugs?
Yeah, we smoked a lot of pot and drunk a whole fifth of Jack Daniels. I mean, to commit any type of crime, most guys get high because your conscience is, a person doesn't have to be religious to know what is right and wrong. Your conscience tells you. And the reason why people get high before they commit crimes is so that they can stop hearing that voice in the back of their mind nagging and telling them this is wrong, don't do it, because if you do it, you're going to get in trouble. And so to negate that, you get high, and so that you can go ahead and do what you know you shouldn't do.
And after you were arrested, you gave a full confession.
I gave a 2.5-hour confession to the GBI. He said to me...
That's the Georgia Bureau of Investigation.
Right. Yeah, he said to me, if you are so sorry about the crime, then why don't you tell us about it? And I said, okay, I'll tell you everything that I can remember. But what was so repulsing and shocking to me was the fact that while I'm telling them, it's like I'm really seeing it for the first time, myself, actually, what I actually did. And it's just hard to deal with the fact that I shot someone and killed somebody for some money.
Now, later you got the police reports and so forth in the case. Is that right?
Yeah, after being sentenced to death and the judge told me that I'm going to be executed on Friday the 13th, well, my lawyer didn't explain anything to me about there being an appeal process. So, September 13th, I'm sitting on my bed waiting to be executed, and nobody shows up, and so I'm thinking I'll be executed Saturday or Sunday. So you just wait with this anticipation for the guards, and every time you hear them, and then they just pass by and don't say anything to me. Monday they give me a letter, and my lawyer's like, oh, Billy, I forgot to tell you that you're not going to be executed on Friday the 13th. Your case is going on to appeal, and I need you to tell your sister to give me $3,000 to do this. So I was pretty upset at that, and I told my sister, listen, you fire this guy, and I will represent myself. And in doing so, I filed a petition to the court and got my transcript. And a police report came along with the transcript. And while I was going through the police report, I saw all the names of the members of the victim's family. And I knew at that point that I had to try to do something. You can't bring a person back. You can't help, but in apologizing, it really helps. So I wrote the family and asked them if they could find it in their heart to forgive me. I would appreciate it. And to my surprise, within the next week, I began to get letters back, and they told me that they did forgive me, and actually that started a correspondence with the victim's family and I writing letters for the whole 16 and a half years that I was on death row.
And how many letters did you write there initially?
To the victim's family?
Yes.
It was about 30 letters.
About 30 letters.
Yeah.
And you told each one of them?
I told each one of them individually that I was sorry, and if they could find it in their heart to forgive me, I appreciate it. And I got letters back from just about everybody.
And you remained in correspondence with them throughout the time? And are you still in touch with them today?
Yeah, even to this day, we talk by telephone. I have been down to Rennes to visit them a couple times, and their family.
Right.
Yeah.
They're like your family.
Yes.
And we should put this where this case took place. This was in the town of Louisville, which was in Jefferson County, Georgia.
Yeah.
And you were serving in the military.
Yeah, in Augusta, Georgia.
And what you were in Fort Benning?
Fort Gordon.
Fort Gordon, I'm
Fort
sorry.
Gordon.
Fort Gordon, right.
Yeah, which
sorry.
is...
That's in Columbus, Fort Benning.
Yeah.
And tell us just a little bit about your military career.
Well,
I
joined the Army because I wanted to get away from the people in the neighborhood, because the neighborhood was violent, and I didn't want to go to jail. I didn't want to get messed up on drugs. I had friends that was getting killed or going to prison. And I said, well, I'm going to get away from all of that and just join the military and make a career out of that.
You were from Columbus, Ohio.
Columbus, Ohio, yes.
Right.
And I really, really liked the military. I mean, it was help for me because I think it gave me the discipline and sort of like the fatherly advice that I didn't get, because my father went to prison when I was 4, so he wasn't there. And so to me, also it's like a game. Everything to me at that time was sort of like a game. I'm always going to be the best at it and do the best that I could. And so I like the physicality of the military. And I like the fact that it would take you to different countries and places that I would never go if I wasn't in the military.
Where'd you serve before you came to Fort Gordon?
I served 3 years in Germany. I was actually I was trained to be a heavy equipment operator, and I really didn't want to do that in Germany. So they allowed me to OJT as a military police. So first, I worked in a stockade as a guard for 16 months, and then I worked as a mail clerk because I told the captain of the prison that I didn't like that type of job, being a guard. It bothered me having to lock other soldiers up. And I felt that I wanted to be somewhere where I could sort of help them. And being a mail clerk, I felt that I could help them with getting mail and getting people on their visiting list. And so that helped. And then our company moved from Frankfurt to Offenbach. We switched with another company. And when we switched, they moved me to the 709th MB company to send me exactly right back to Frankfurt where I was in the beginning. And in that company, that's where you work on the streets.
So you had actually been the equivalent of a prison guard while you were in the military.
Prison guard, police, yeah.
And when you came to death row, you now had a very different relationship with the guards.
Yeah, because I was the inmate and they were the guards. But I think that experience of being a guard really helped me understand of how to relate to them and to be able to talk with them, especially when you have guards that are always mean and wanting to do stuff to inmates. Being able to explain to other guys, well, you know, you got to understand that this is the only job that this guy can get. Most of the guys that are guards couldn't make it as police officers, couldn't pass those tests and stuff. So now they're here. So they're like a police, but they're not the police that they wanted to be or a highway patrolman, and they got an attitude about it. And so you have to learn how to deal with them. And I think the only thing that really helps them is when you show them respect for who they are as a person and their position.
And you did that while you were in
Yeah,
prison.
I did it all the time because I was on the other side as
Right.
being a guard in the military.
Now, you came very close to execution. Could you tell us about that?
Yes, in 1984, I had lost all of my appeals, and I got an execution date for May the 24th, 1984. Actually, Judge McMillan sent me, and this was sort of crazy because he sent me a letter and an execution date. He sent me a letter, and in the letter he said that he did not want to set a date, but the Attorney General's office was pressing him to set a date. So he set this date that he's setting, he's giving me the max amount of time that he can, that he waited 2 months before he set it, and then he gave me the max amount of time in setting it. He said that he did everything that he could in doing this. I mean, he could have just changed it and then gave me a life sentence. He could have did that, but this is, I don't know, this was, I guess he felt like he was cleaning his soul or something.
When you say the maximum amount of time, you mean from the date of the order until the date in which you'd be executed?
Yes.
Right. He gave you as much time as the law allowed.
As much time as the law allowed. And he was saying that he held off 2 months.
Right.
That they just harassed him for 2 months
Right.
before he did that.
Right.
And so I said, all right. So I knew that this was coming. So I had the date before the state had the date. And so when they came and said, okay, this is the 21st of May. You got an execution date for the 24th. They took and packed all my stuff up and took me to the captain's office and said, here's your execution warrant. We want you to read it and tell us you understand it. We're going to kill you on the 24th at 12 p.m. You understand that. This is what the state has ordered. And they wanted me to sign it. And then also they said, well, okay, here's another form. What do you want us to do with your body when we kill you? We can bury you here at the state, at the cemetery the state has, or your family can come and get your body. And then you have to sign another form as who do you want to be the chaplain with you. Now, idea was you can choose from their chaplains, and they had like 5. And none of their chaplains really did anything in interacting with us on death row. And so when I read what the rules was, I told them, well, the rules, so I can have any chaplain. It doesn't specify as that they have to work here. So the warden, the captain and I went round and round, and I told him that I was going to call my lawyer and we'd file a lawsuit, and that would get this execution stayed. And they said, okay, just have whoever you want. And so I asked for my friend Murphy Davis, who works in Atlanta, who well, she's not a lawyer, but she helps death row inmates.
She's a minister. She's a Presbyterian minister, right?
Right. And so after that, they take all your clothes and give you a jumpsuit. Say, this is the one we're going to execute you in, a new pair of boots and no strings, no belt. And then I was taken to Death Watch. That is a cell that is like a regular cell, but there's 2 officers that sit right in front of it that record your every move. Every single thing that you say and do for those 72 hours is recorded. And I'd asked the guy, I said, well, what is this about? He said, oh, this is our proof to society to show them that we treated you nice before we killed you.
And you said there are 2 guys. What did they each do?
Well, both of these correctional officers, they just sit at the table. These were the 2 that put the chains and stuff on me and brought me to the Death Watch cell. These were the same 2 guys that stopped me in front of the electric chair and said, well, and pulled the sheet off of it and said, Billy, we want you to see this and see that this is the chair that you're going to be sitting in 72 hours from now, and just look at it.
Now explain how that happened. They actually took you to the execution chamber.
Right. Instead of the 2 guys bringing me to the Death Watch cell out of the back door of the captain's office, which leads right to the cell, Death Watch cell block, they took me all the way around the prison and brought me into the viewing room that the prosecutors or the victim's family or the defendant's family come in and sit and view the execution. And so as we come into this room, it's amazing to me because it looks like a church. You got pews on this side, and this side you got red carpet. And as you walk down the middle of this carpet, there's a podium at the end, and you could tell that the electric chair was under, but it had a big white sheet over it. So these two guys walked me right up to the chair, and unexpectedly, one guy just snatched the sheet off of it and said, "Billy, look at this. This is where you're going to be sitting in the next 72 hours."
And then they took you to the cell.
Then they took me to the death watch cell and put me in. And the captain came by and he explains, these are your rights. If you want to watch the television, you tell them to turn it on, because there may be news about your case or any updates about your case. And same as with the radio or the newspapers. But if you don't want these items on, the guards won't turn them on. They can't turn them on unless you say so, basically.
Right. And so a lot of the time there, up until you got word, obviously, that you got to stay, you spent your time visiting with people. Just describe that.
Well, the first part, I was sort of being somewhat terrorized by the guards, because after the captain left, the guards asked me to turn the TVs on, and I told them I wasn't watching the TVs. I didn't care nothing about it. So they said, okay, since you won't allow us to be entertained by the television, then we will entertain you. So they opened up their green log books and began to tell me what each of the 13 inmates who had been executed, what they did. They go line by line with how they moved, what they said, what they did for the whole 72 hours. And
this is the time leading up to each of their executions.
Yes, the 72 hours that each one of them went through.
And you knew all of these people, right?
Lived with each one of them for at least 10 years.
Right.
Knew them very well. And that was really, really disturbing to hear that. And for them to even do something like that, why would guards want to terrorize you? And just to hear friends, how they reacted, the things that they went through the last 72 hours of their life.
And tell us about your lawyers. What was you had a bad experience with your first lawyer. You fired him.
Yeah.
You took over your own case. Did you finally find some lawyers that you were satisfied with?
Well, yes. The second lawyer that I had was from Athens Law School. And he came about because actually my mother-in-law, she wrote the NAACP in New York. And she told them, said, listen, I've been supporting you guys forever. My son-in-law is on death row. He didn't have a lawyer. Y'all going to help him where I'm coming to New York, and there's going to be some trouble up in New York when she get there. And so some kind of way they talked to Athens Law School at University of
Georgia Law School at Athens, yes.
Yeah, and so a lawyer came by and he said that, yeah, he wanted to take the case. And I said, well, before you do that, I'm just not just giving it to anybody. We're going to do this together. And he was all agreeable, so yeah, and let me explain to you what we're going to do is we're going to lay the foundation here in the state courts. We're going to file all these issues so that when the state deny them, because we know they are, we'll have this when we get into the federal court. And what happened is while the case was in the state courts, there was a ruling from the federal court that made their office end up with 250 state habeas. It was just 3 lawyers. And so my lawyer wrote me and said, well, I just can't do all the stuff I need to do with your case. So I'm going to just he just dropped 8 of the issues. And I amended the issues back to the petition, and I petitioned to the judge, let me fire him. If he can't help me the way I need to be, he don't need to be on the case. And so the judge would not let me fire him and actually had him come, and they had a hearing. And out of all the issues I had, they only argued one hearing and one issue. And I tried to get up and talk, and the judge said the next time that I would say something that he'd have me gagged because I'm not a lawyer and I can't argue it. So that really, really made me upset about attorneys and stuff. And so I finally got him off the case, and I was doing it myself until I got attorney Dan Gavelber from Northeastern University, who came in '79 and began to help me out.
Now, Dan Gavelber was ultimately the dean at Northeastern Law School.
Right. When he first started, he was just one of the professors, and I think after 2 years on the case, he became the dean, and they have a death penalty clinic at the school, so I guess a lot of his students was helping and working on my case. And he really helped me, though, not just in working on the case. He really helped me as a person to rehabilitate me and from not liking lawyers because I just didn't trust them. Right,
because of all these bad experiences you had.
Right.
And ultimately also John Charles Boger The head of the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund became one of your lawyers.
Right, because when I first started representing myself, I wrote John Boger, I wrote Millett Farmer, and I can't remember this other professor, was in one of the law books I had.
Right.
And so I wrote him, and they were giving me information. And Jack and I got to be close. And Jack Boger, we got to be close, and he was giving me information and telling me what I should do with this issue, or maybe this issue might work or doesn't work. And then in around, I think like 83, he actually started assisting Dan Gavelber on the case.
Because your case ultimately actually was taken by the Supreme Court of the United States, right?
Yes, it was taken by the Supreme, yeah.
And Jack Boger argued the case.
He argued
before the Supreme Court.
And what the issues at the Supreme Court that the state was pushing, because I had gotten relief in the district court,
right,
and lost the relief in the 11th Circuit. So the argument at the Supreme Court became a successive petition.
Right.
That's what the argument was, that I had filed a successive petition and had all these other issues that I'm bringing late. And actually all the issues that they say I'm bringing late was in the initial petition that Judge Edenfield refused to hear when he granted me relief on the first issue. And he said he didn't have to look at the rest of them. And the 11th Circuit agreed with him, and so that caused the problem. And so we were telling the Supreme Court, we didn't abuse the writ, we didn't cause the problem. The state caused the problem. And we wouldn't be here if they would just have let me go back and had these other issues heard, because there was at least 3 other issues within that group that was qualified enough to overturn the death sentence.
And just so we're clear, Judge Edenfield was the United States District Judge.
Yes.
And he granted you relief when you first were under death sentence.
Yes.
And then your case went back and forth between panels of the 11th Circuit, that is 3 judges on the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit, went en banc so that the entire 12-member court examined it, ultimately went to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court, after hearing the argument, sent the case back without making a decision. Just said to consider it in light of another decision they had made.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you lost on that decision at the 11th Circuit.
Well, I lost on it, but they never really heard it, because the Supreme Court told them to look at it from the perspective of Teague versus Lane, the new case that they had decided on the year prior. And when it went back to the 11th Circuit, they didn't even look at that. They went back to the issues of 1984 when I had the execution date. And from there, they just denied, and I got a new execution date for August the 22nd, 1990.
And that turned out to be the critical time, right?
Absolutely, yeah. On the 21st of August at 10:30 in the morning, the assistant warden came. I was in the visiting room, and he told me that the United States Supreme Court had given me a 30-day stay. And I called my lawyer, Dan Gavelber, and he said, yep, we got a 30-day stay, and, since the court has my case, the Georgia Board of Pardon and Paroles would not look at it because the case is being reviewed by the Supreme Court, because they never interfere with any of the courts that was looking at the case, because the parole board is like the last resort in Georgia anyway. So we're like, fine, Supreme Court got it. So I go back to the visiting room, and while I'm in the visiting room that day, somehow the parole board decided they would hear my case. And everybody involved was notified, and the victim's family came to the parole board on their own without any coaching from anyone and said that we have been writing Billy for the last 16 and a half years, and he is our brother, and you cannot kill him. We lost one family member, and we don't want to lose another one. As well as my dad testifying, my sister, even the first lawyer that I had. He came and he testified and explained to the parole board why it was his decision to plead me guilty. Now, he didn't tell the truth about his brother being a judge and all that. The story he told them was that he felt because in Jefferson County there had been another robbery of a banker and his wife that had been tortured and killed in their house. It was 6 months prior to my crime. and that he felt that the county was still in such an uproar that nobody could get a fair trial in that county. And had I went to a jury, I would have been sentenced to death. And he said that was his reasoning, and that what he thought, that by going directly to the judge, he felt that the judge would understand that this is not a death penalty case and would give me a life sentence. But he didn't take in consideration nor understand that the sheriff ran the county, and that the sheriff told the judge to give me a death sentence, and that was it.
Also, the judge is elected, so the judge is going to stand for re-election after he sentences you.
Yeah, yeah.
So that probably was a factor as well. Now, Mother Teresa was also involved in the parole board.
Yeah, a friend of mine named John Deere, who was a high school student when I started writing him, went to high school, college, and became a Jesuit priest, and he went and spent a couple years in India with Mother Teresa. And so he was writing me from India, and so she was well aware of my situation. So John is back in the United States by this time, and I got this new execution date, and he finds out. So he calls her and asks her to call the parole board, and she tells him that, well, if they want to talk to her, then they should call her. Well, I don't know how it came about, but they tell me, since I was in the visiting room and I had no idea this is happening, that the chairman of the parole board stopped the hearing and had a press conference and said Mother Teresa wanted to talk to him, and he calls her, and she tells him that he needed to do what Jesus would do, and all 5 members of the parole board vote to commute my sentence from a death sentence to a life sentence.
So suddenly you're no longer under death sentence.
Yep. All of a sudden, just like that. One day you're a death row inmate, the next day you're not.
One day you're in chains, you can't move anywhere without 2 guards. The next day they give you a piece of paper and tell you to go to another part of the prison.
Yeah. Not only that, when I got off death row, one of the captains who used to work on death row came down to the cell block that I was in, and he told the guard to bring me out of the cell block, and he said, "Billy, you've been here 10 years. And you have only seen death row." He said, "You see this long hallway?" He said, "I'm over this hallway." And he gave me a broom, and he said, "You just stay out in this hall all day." He said, "And if anybody say anything to you, you tell them come see me." So I go from being locked up to now I'm out in the hallway by myself up to 9 o'clock at night, just walking back and forth with a broom.
Now, you say you've been there 10 years. That's because you started out on the old death row in Reidsville, the Georgia State Prison, and then after 6 years it moved to the Georgia Diagnostic Prison, which is in Jackson, Georgia.
Right. Well, I stayed in the county jail 3 years.
Right.
I was in the county jail 3 years.
Oh, right.
I was at Reidsville 3 years, and then we were all moved to Jackson.
Right. Let me just one other last piece of this that hadn't been mentioned, but certainly should be, is your faith and spirituality. How did that come into play in your case?
Well, what happened when I was in the county jail, my cousin wrote me a letter, and she said, "Billy, I know you have a death sentence and you need to accept Christ in your life since you're going to be executed." And so I was all flippant, and I wrote her back and told her, I'm getting ready to die. What I need to do this for? Well, she never wrote me back. She just told her pastor in Ohio, who called a pastor in Rome, Georgia. And this pastor and his wife drove 250 miles to the county jail, didn't have an appointment, didn't tell anybody that was coming, just showed up. And that's amazing to me because this sheriff was so mean, he didn't let nobody do anything. But however, they convinced him to bring me downstairs. Matter of fact, he came upstairs personally and got me. He said, "Listen, there's a preacher downstairs that wants to see you." And so when I came down, Bishop Guthrie said, "Listen, son, we know that you killed a man and that you've been sentenced to death. But we want you to know that there's a just judge, and his name is Jesus Christ, and God always does right. And he loves you." And what really touched my heart was the fact that here's people telling me that even though you killed somebody, God still loves you, and we love you. It's somebody who accepted me for me being who I was at that point, at the lowest point in my life. And it made such an impact that it changed my life. And I said, well, what they have is what I need. And accepting Christ changed my life dramatically.
And you actually taught Bible study classes while you were on death row.
Yeah, not only did I teach Bible study classes, I studied and I got a bachelor's degree while I was on death row in theology, but it helped me. The only way you can do prison time is helping others.
Right.
Because the more you think about yourself and think about your situation, the harder it is. The more you give out and help others, the easier it is. And actually, it's that way in life, too. And so teaching the Bible classes really helped me, because anytime you got to teach somebody something, you have to know more than what you teach it. You got to know more than what they know. So you have to study more. And it really helped me, and it gave me something qualitative to do. And to see inmates' life change really, really helped me.
And let me ask you this. A year after the board commuted your sentence from death to life imprisonment, it paroled you.
Yes, which was
a miracle.
Yeah, a miracle in itself, because when they said that they commuted the sentence, they also said I have to serve 25 more years before they would think about looking at my case.
Now let me ask you this. Did the minister or Bishop Guthrie, the person who first came to see you when you first got arrested, did he play any role once you were released?
Well, not only once I was released, but all through. He constantly visited, he constantly wrote, he never stopped. And so the day that I got out, he was there, and they picked me up and took me up to Rome. By the time we got back to Rome, it was like 11 o'clock at night. And he took me to his house. He said, all right, take those prison clothes off that they give you. And this is like the first suit I ever had in my life. He gives me, so we're about the same size, give me some new shoes. And he said, all right, come with me. And then he takes me to the church, and I'm trying to figure out who goes to church at like 11 o'clock at night. And so we go into the church, and it's dark, so I'm still wondering what is going on. And we go through the church into the fellowship hall. And there's like 300 people sitting there. So he walks me up to the front and sits me over to the side and starts talking to the people and said, listen, I want you to know that we have been praying for Billy Moore for the last 17 and a half years. And a lot of times we pray, we don't see our answer, or we pray and we hope God to give us an answer. He said, but I want you people to know that your prayers are answered, because here's Billy right here. And he said, come here. And from that point to this, I've been talking to people. That's how that started.
And he also gave you a job.
Yeah, my job was his personal chauffeur.
Did you live in his house?
I lived in his house.
And you have basically been involved in a ministry ever since you were released. Is that a fair statement?
Well, it's a fair statement for me being involved in the ministry on the outside, but I was involved in the ministry on the inside too.
Oh, as well.
So for the last almost 40 years, I've been in ministry and trying to help people know that the change that will really change somebody is God in their life.
All right. Billy Moore, thank you for coming, and thank you for sharing a remarkable story of your time on death row and ultimately your commutation and then the life you've lived in the community since that time.